Thank you. Good evening. My name is Ben Chapelar. I'm Councillor for St James's in Tunbridge Wells, and I'm the leader of Tunbridge Wells Borough Council. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this Cabinet meeting on Thursday, the 23rd of February. Before we start, please could we give our full attention to the following safety and broadcast announcements, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. In the event of the fire alarm ringing continuously, you must immediately evacuate the building at walking pace. Members of staff will escort you via the most direct available route. We will make our way to the fire assembly point, which is by the west door at St Dunstan's. Once outside, a check will be made to ensure everyone has left safely and no one is to re-enter the building until advised that it is safe to do so. This is a public meeting and proceedings are being webcast live online. The recording will also be available for playback on the Council's website shortly afterwards. You should all be aware that any third party is able to record or film Council meetings unless exempt or confidential information is being considered. The Council would not accept liability for any third party recordings. In order to ensure there is continuous live stream this evening, can I ask everyone to not connect to the Wi-Fi while we are broadcasting? It is very important that the outcomes of the meeting are clear. At the end of each agenda item, the Chair will ask whether the matter is agreed. In the absence of a clear majority, or if the Chair decides a full vote is desirable, a vote will be taken by a show of hands. Members should raise their hand to indicate their vote when called and keep their hand up until the vote has been announced. Members requesting a recorded vote must do so before the vote is taken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. For the benefit of the recording, the following members of Cabinet are present. Councillor Luke Everett, Councillor Wendy Fitzsimmons, Councillor David Hayward, Councillor Andy Hickey, Councillor Hugo Pound, Councillor Justine Rutland, Councillor Nancy Warren, and Councillor Ben Chapelar. Also present are the following members of staff from Tunbridge Wells Borough Council: William Benson, Chief Executive, Paul Taylor, Lee Collier, Jane Feynman, Jane Clark, Claudette Valmont, Anne McCarthy, Emma Moran, and Mark O'Callaghan. For the benefit of members of the public who may be watching, I'd like to explain a couple of things. Each report that we're going to be looking at tonight has been already considered by the Cabinet Advisory Board, and their view has been taken into consideration before it comes to Cabinet as part of the Council's pre-scrutiny. As members of the Cabinet, we've had our agenda for over a week, and we've had the opportunity to read them, to study them, and ask members of staff any questions ahead of tonight's meeting. When the agenda is being considered, I will ask the Cabinet member responsible for that area of the Council to provide a brief overview of the report before we then ask any questions of the members of staff. We'll then move into a discussion, and then we will take a vote once I've ensured that everybody's understanding of the content of each item. And then we'll proceed to a vote. So that's how things are going to work this evening. So if I can actually start the meeting, the first item on the agenda are announcements from the leader. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to the first Cabinet of the Borough Partnership. And usually these meetings take place during the day at 10:30, but we've moved them to the evening to 6:30. And normally they take place in Tunbridge Wells Town Hall. And as part of our commitment as a new administration in Tunbridge Wells, we're having our first one tonight in this magnificent vestry hall in Cranbrook. And this is part of our commitment as a new administration to go out and meet residents and businesses in all corners of our borough. So the idea tonight is to get through the formal business as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and then have an open question and answer session with any of us that you feel you want to ask questions and share your views with us. And that's a genuine desire on our part as a new administration to engage people. We spend a lot of time as councillors on the doorstep and this is about us not getting sucked into the Tunbridge Wells bubble, town hall bubble, and actually staying in the real world and meeting residents. So that's my announcement. I understand, Councillor Hugo Pound, you wish to make one announcement.
I do, thank you. So I'm Hugo Pound. I have taken on the Cabinet responsibility for housing and planning, and I just wanted to read a statement to correct a statement made by the previous portfolio holder for housing at the last full council meeting, in which there was an error which needs to be corrected. In answer to a supplementary question by Dr. Shadi Rogers at full council on the 22nd of February 2022, in which she asked how many new social housing units have been delivered in the last 5 years by this administration, the previous portfolio holder for housing provided an inadvertently inaccurate reply at a subsequent full council meeting on the 27th of April 2022. The correct answer to Dr. Rogers' question is that 36 new social housing units have been built in the last 5 years, not 634, as the previous portfolio holder stated. The previous portfolio holder seemingly confused all forms of affordable housing, an umbrella term describing all tenures of affordable homes, with the very specific question about the number of units built for social rent, which is defined as properties rented at up to, but no more than 60% of market rent. So in the last 5 years, across the whole borough, which has a housing waiting list of 946 individuals and families, and where many families cannot afford to even rent at market rate, let alone buy a property, the previous administration saw the delivery of 36 new social housing units over the 5-year period from 2016 to 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pound. Item number 2 on our agenda is apologies for absence, and we have no apologies for absence this evening. Item 3 are declarations of interest, and which we need to record if any member of the Cabinet wishes to make any declaration of interest in relation to the items on the agenda. Does anybody have any at all? No, we have no declarations of interest to make. Item number 4 is notification of visiting persons registered to speak, and I'm told we have no registered speakers this evening. So we move swiftly on to item number 5, which is minutes of the meeting dated the 14th of April 2022. This is going to sound a bit strange, but none of us were in Cabinet at that meeting. But I'm reliably informed that the draft minutes that went out to the previous administrations came back with no comments, and therefore I think we are safe to say that they are an accurate record of the minutes. Can I ask Cabinet members whether they agree with that one?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Item number 6 is questions from members of the council. The plain English for that is councillors, who are members of Tunbridge Wells Borough Council, and we have received no questions this evening. So we'll move on to item number 7, which is questions of the members of the public, and I'm told that we have no questions from members of the public, but I'm hoping we'll have lots after the formal part of this meeting. I'm going to move straight on to item number 8, considerations for the forward plan as at the 7th of June 2022. And since this agenda was published last week, there have been 2 further items that have been brought into the forward plan. And can I ask Lee Collier, the Head of Finance, to update us, please?
Yes, thank you, Leader. So there's been 2 new reports added to the forward plan. They are an in-year budget review for the year 2022/23, and a sales fees and charges, including car parking report, also for the year 22/23. Both of these reports will be going to the rearranged Cabinet meeting on the 20th of July. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collier. We're moving swiftly on to appointments to working groups of the Cabinet, which is item number 9, which is to note the appointment made by the Leader of the Council in consultation with the other political group leaders, details of which are set out on page 35. There are 4 amendments to the agenda papers that were published. First of all, the group leaders would like to appoint the Amelia Scott Member Oversight Panel as Vice Chairman, Councillor Nick Pope. To the Climate Emergency Advisory Panel, Councillor Margarita Morton. To the Community Grants Assessment Panel, we'd like to add Alex Britcher-Allen as a member of the panel, and we'd like the Public Transport Forum to be chaired by Councillor Alex Britcher-Allen. Would any members like to speak on that item? Can we agree those appointments?
Agreed.
Very much. Okay, moving on to item 10. Agenda 10 is to note the appointment made by the leader of the council in consultation with the other political group leaders. Details are set out on page 45 of the agenda. What that means in plain English is that the council is asked every year to appoint councillors to various outside organisations, which could be charities or local associations, to have a link between us and those organisations. Does anybody wish to speak on that item? No? Okay, could we agree, please? Agreed, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 11, which is a strategic risk register. This report is for noting, and I'm going to pass to Councillor Andy Hickey, who's Cabinet Member for Finance and Performance.
Thank you, Ben. I'll slow you down a bit now. The Council manages actively strategic risk. It's not a requirement for us to do so, but we choose to put in place strategic risk management, and that is reported on an annualised basis and on an ongoing basis to the Cabinet Advisory Group, the Finance and Governance Cabinet Advisory Group. This strategic risk report has been through that Cabinet Advisory Group and has been noted with no particular comments. There are some items moving with this. It's a live document and risks are changing all the time, but there are a couple within the strategic risk report to note. And Lee Collier will take us through put a bit more colour into that report for us.
Thank you, Chairman. At each Audit Governance Committee meeting, this report is considered along with the risk owner, who takes further questions around their responsibility for their individual risks. But on an annual basis, the register comes before Finance and Governance Cabinet Advisory Board and also the Cabinet to comment on. And by way of an update, risk number 1, cyber attack / incident. At a national level, there has been an increase in instances of cyber attacks, and local government is not immune to this. So as part of our management of this, we have commissioned Zurich, the council's insurers, to undertake a cyber risk health check for the council using their specialist cyber risk team. Also, there will be a strategic risk training session and workshop in the autumn, leading to the development of a new strategic risk register. This will be facilitated by the council's insurers, making use of their specialist risk and resilient team. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Do members of the Cabinet have any questions for Andy Hickey or Lee Collier at this stage? No questions at all? Okay, in that case, can I open the debate on that item? Would anybody like to speak on that item? No? I'm picking my pace up again, that's good. Okay, so are we agreed with the motion to note the strategic risk register?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We're moving on to item 12, the annual report on the use of RIPA. And it's Councillor Andy Hickey again, please.
Thank you, Ben. RIPA is a report on our strategic use of investigatory powers as a council. It's an infrequently used power, but is reviewed on an annualised basis. Claudette Valmond will talk us through the report.
Excuse me, it's very hard to hear. There is a bit of an acoustic problem in here. Could I ask the members to speak a bit more slowly and perhaps a little bit more loud?
I apologise, sorry. Thank you. We'll try our best.
I hardly heard a single word.
Okay. Thank you.
Of either of us? I have a sore throat. My apologies.
I think maybe it's because otherwise the echoes around the whole conversation.
Okay.
By the time we get here, it's Doesn't make a lot of sense.
Paddock, would you like to?
Thank you, Leader. Thank you. Good evening. This is the Council's annual report on its use of covert surveillance under regulations of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. The Council very rarely uses its RIPA powers and only does so in circumstances where the use is proportionate. There have been no RIPA applications made or authorised since March 2011. The Council receives regular inspections from the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, the most recent of which was in March 2021. The RIPA policy was last updated in February 2021 and is due for further revision in February 2023. Refresher training for authorising officers, recommended by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, is carried out once every 3 years. The last training exercise was undertaken in March 2021, and further training for authorising officers will be in the last quarter of 2024. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members of the Cabinet have any questions for Councillor Andy Hickey or Claudette Valmont? No questions? Would anybody like to say anything in the debate? No. Therefore, can I move to the recommendation, which is that this report is being noted? Could we agree? Agreed. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 13, and I'll try and speak a little bit slower just to help with the acoustics. Revenue Management Report Quarter 4. If I can ask Andy Hickey, as Cabinet Member for Finance and Performance.
I will muster my voice and try and speak a little more slowly and loudly. The Revenue Management Report for last quarter is a bit of a rear view mirror on the finances of the Council to the period ending the 31st of March 2022. This has been through the Finance and Governance Cabinet Advisory Board and was accepted as recommended to the Cabinet by that Advisory Board. Jane Feynman will talk us through some of the detail within the report. Jane.
Thank you. The unaudited year-end cost of services outturn was 14.13 million. That's 552,000 under budget and an improvement since quarter 3 of £237,000. Due to the losses in fees and charges from the pandemic, the full year budget had assumed that £3 million of reserves would be needed to support the provision of services. By quarter 3, the forecast had reduced this to needing only 963,000. But due to further cost savings of 212,000 and additional government grants of around 584,000 this quarter, there's been no need to recourse to reserves. There are many forecast outturn variances in the cost of services, and those are outlined in Appendix C of the report. But the key drivers of the savings are staff costs, which were £897,000 under budget, and additional grant funding from government of 2.17 million. And that was for sales, fees and charges compensation, new burdens funding, and the council tax reduction scheme. Business rates show a surplus to budget of 1.791 million, and this is due to the business rates retention scheme. The council is prudent and doesn't rely upon this when setting the budget, and has used 1.434 of this surplus to make it money reserves to fund the capital programme for 22-23. The budget included a transfer to the grant volatility reserve of 860,000, which was equivalent to the amount received from the New Homes bonus. Instead of making this transfer, the council has overpaid its minimum revenue provision. That's the internal borrowing from working capital by 1.152 million. Therefore reducing this outstanding debt. The remaining surplus from business rates was also utilised for this overpayment. The remaining revenue balance of £35,000 has been credited to the general fund. The council had 39.466 million of usable reserves as at the 31st of March 21. However, it should be noted that 1.1 million has already been allocated to the 22-23 capital programme, and 7 million held in the grant volatility reserve will be used at year end to fund the collection fund deficit, so cannot be used for other purposes. The council will need to continue to work to balance its revenue budget going forward, as we still have a shortfall of 944,000, including the new house bonus, for 22-23 budget at present. It is also forecast that the remaining unallocated reserves and the internal borrowing will almost be equal, meaning that our reserves will only just cover our debt by the end of 22-23. So it's very important that we try to replenish our reserves going forward. Now, all of that said, the fact that we've managed to close the year without needing reserves in order to finance our services, and we've actually been able to contribute to those reserves to help pay for our future capital commitments, is a really, really positive outturn for the year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Jane or Andy on item 13? No questions? Okay, so I open the debate. Would anybody like to comment on the debate? No? Okay. I wish my students at school were this quiet. Okay, so I'm going to move to the recommendations. Recommendation 1 is that Cabinet note the actual revenue expenditure outturn and impact on reserves for the year ended 31st of March 2022. Recommendation 2, that Cabinet note that the expected withdrawal from reserves of £963,000 to meet the forecast deficit at Q3 will not be needed, and the sum of £35,000 will be transferred into the general fund. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 14, Capital Management Report, Q4. I'm going to ask Councillor Hickey to present the report, please.
Thank you, Ben. This is a report on our capital expenditure for Q4, and it summarises the actual outturn on expenditure and on capital schemes as of the 31st of March 2022. So a bit of a rearward-facing mirror. The report has been through the Finance and Governance Cabinet Advisory Board, and it was resolved that the recommendation to the Cabinet is as set out in the report. Again, Jane, if you could talk us through the detail of that. Thank you.
Thank you. So the actual outturn for capital expenditure was 9.935 million, a net decrease of 2.3 million from the previously approved budgets. The majority of this spend was for the Amelia at 7.2 million. 2.24 million has been rescheduled into 22-23, comprising mainly of 1.4 million for the Amelia Scott, 0.2 million for disabled facilities grants, and 0.2 million for ICT strategy spending, ICT computers. And there has been a small net decrease in spend of 64,000 as some projects have been completed a little under budget. There are also 3 new capital applications included for approval, which are 505,000 for the Town Hall window refurbishment, 110,000 for the Assembly Hall Theatre window refurbishment, and 5 million for the Town Hall conversion to facilitate the new co-working arrangements. Now, this was approved in principle by full council back in October 2021, but it's now requested to be included in the capital programme following the appointment of the co-working provider. And finally, during this year, 215,000 of capital receipts were received, 160,000 for land at Speldhurst Road and 55,000 for land at Acer Cottage. These amounts were transferred to the capital receipts reserved and were used to finance capital projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Jane Feynman or Andy Hickey? No? Okay, so the debate is open. Would anybody like to say anything? No. Okay, in that case I will move to recommendations on item 14. There are 4 recommendations. Recommendation number 1 is that Cabinet note the actual gross and net expenditure for the year and the sources of finance as shown in appendices B to D. Recommendation 2 is that Cabinet approve the proposed variations to the capital programme set out in note 4.3 to 4.13. Recommendation 3 is that Cabinet approve the proposed movement between years set out in note 4.14. And finally, recommendation 4 is that Cabinet note the inclusion of a new scheme into the capital programme as set out in notes 4.15 and 4.17. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 15, which is the Treasury and Prudential Indicator Management Report for Quarter 4. And Councillor Andy Hickey, again, please.
We're getting used to the flow now. So this report, again, has been through the Finance and Governance Cabinet Advisory Board and was accepted and recommended to this Cabinet. For the uninitiated, this is about how the Council manages its money, earns interest, and does that in a sensible and effective way. And we have some very strong skills in the officer group in this area. Jane, I think if you could give us another summary, please. Thank you.
Yes, this is the last time you have to listen to me this evening. So, the actual interest from investments and bank interest for 21-22 was £487,000, an increase of £25,000 since quarter 3. This is an increase of £125,000 from the approved budget of £362,000. The main contributor was the Property Investment Fund, which has paid net dividends for the year of 4.42%. The £9 million investment with the Property Fund is valued at £12.241 million as at the 31st of March 22. This means that the value has increased by 1.828 million, which is 17.5% this financial year. This is held in a reserve until it's withdrawn, however, so it doesn't impact the overall cost of services. The bank interest rate, set by the Bank of England, has moved from 0.1% in March 2020 to 0.75% on the 17th of March 22, where it finished the financial year. However, it rose again on the 5th of May 22 to 1%, where it remains now. Well, it doesn't remain now, actually. This was at F&G, it remained now. Now it's gone up to 1.25. We are now looking for short-term, very low-risk opportunities to invest our available cash rather than just leaving it in our current account. And finally, just to confirm that none of the prudential indicators were breached in this quarter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Andy or Jane Feynman? Okay, so I'll open the debate. Does anybody want to say anything on this item? No, in that case, I'll move on to the recommendations. We have 2 recommendations. Recommendation number 1 is that Cabinet note the Treasury Management and Prudential Indicator position for 2021-2022. The second recommendation is that the actual for investment and bank interest is £487,000, an increase of £125,000 from the approved budget of £362,000, and a further improvement of £25,000 from the Q3 projection. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We're now moving on to item 16, which is a performance summary for Q4. And Andy, it's you again.
Thank you, Ben. So the council measures its performance both in the way it delivers projects and also it delivers the services to the community on a day-by-day basis. And they're reviewed internally within the council officer group and managed here in the performance management report. This is a summary for Q4, which was to the 31st of March 2022. We have another Jane to talk us through this now. So Jane Clark, if you could give us a summary, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as Councillor Hickey said, this is the Q4 performance report for the Council. It covers the period from January to March of 2022. It's split into two sections, which look at project performance and service performance. More details for each of these are given in the appendices. In terms of project performance, there were 5 projects left in the 5-year plan. That is the Council's corporate plan in terms of projects that it wants to deliver over a period of 5 years. The 5 that were left were the Amelia, the local plan, new sports facilities, and the Cranbrook and Paddock hubs. The local plan and new sports facilities were rated as green for this quarter, and the Amelia and the hubs were rated as amber. Obviously, by now we're in Q1 and the Amelia has been completed as a project. Performance for Q4, however, was a similar performance compared to previous quarters of last year. In terms of service performance, there are 32 indicators that are collected on services, 23 of which have targets. Of those that have targets, 15 were performing, 7 were not performing, and 1 was unavailable at the time of reporting. This is similar performance again to previous quarters. Those that were not performing were households in temporary accommodation, the percentage of household waste sent to reuse and recycling, the number of working days lost due to sickness, performance on processing minor planning applications, and performance on processing other planning applications, and performance on appeal of both minor and other applications. The Council produces underperforming indicator recovery plans from each service when their indicators are underperforming, and again, the details of these are available in the appendices at the back of the report. Thank you, Chair. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Andy Hickey or Jane Clark? None? Okay. Does anybody want to contribute to the debate? Councillor Pounds.
Well, I thought someone should. I just wanted to say, both on the public record and to the quite large number of people who are sitting here this evening, just to explain again, we have a very strange and convoluted process within the Council where all matters that we have been noting this evening have gone through Cabinet advisory boards, which are made up of members from all parties across the Council, and all of the items that we have looked at this evening have been discussed. I know that the leader explained that earlier, but the fact that we're nodding them through this evening doesn't mean that we're not discussing them. It simply means that all of the work has been done by a cross-party group before it comes to Cabinet, and their comments and recommendations from that advisory board have been heard by the Cabinet and taken on board as part of our consideration. So that is an explanation of why we have sat here like dummies going, agreed, and it's all gone through. The second point is, as Councillor Hickey has said, is that we are looking through the rearview mirror. We are looking back at last year. All of this stuff is done. And our responsibility, I think, is looking forward, but we do have to acknowledge what has happened looking back as well. So I hope that's a bit of an explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hugo Pound. That's really helpful, just to put it into context. I'm sure there'll be some lively debates as the year progresses. We are moving to the recommendations. Recommendation number 1 is that the Cabinet notes a summary of projected performance over quarter 4 for 2021-2022 at Appendix A. Recommendation 2 is that Cabinet notes a summary of service performance over quarter 4 for 2021-2022 at Appendix B, and that Cabinet notes a recovery plans for quarter 4 for 2021 to 2022 at Appendices C to J. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 17. This might be more interesting. Item 17 is complaints summary for quarters 3 and 4. And Councillor Andy Hickey, it's back to you again.
I get complaints as well, don't I? You'll be amazed to know that the council receives complaints, and that they are monitored very carefully and very closely, and our performance in both responding to those complaints and dealing with them is also monitored. This report, which has again been, as Councillor Pound mentioned, through the Finance and Governance Cabinet Advisory Board, is for the second half of the last year. It's done in 2 halves. This is from the 1st of October 2021 to the 31st of March 2022. The Cabinet Advisory Board noted that we were failing to respond within our target during that period, mainly due to staffing difficulties at the Council. And so that's been noted, but is not, and actions will be taken on that, mainly to do with recruitment. And Jay will again talk us through the complaints report. Thank you, Jay.
The total number of complaints recorded in this period is 208, which is an increase over the previous period. The increase occurred at stage 1 of the complaints process, with less going through to stage 2 than the previous period. The Council only has 2 stages to its complaints process. The increase was down to the fact that complaints were recorded once they had been officially closed. There was a historic backlog of complaints that had been received as a result of the waste contract issues, and the final batch of these were closed at the beginning of this reference period. The Council did not meet its 90% target of responding to complaints in time, responding to only 28% of complaints in time at stage 1. Again, this is significantly due to the backlog that was resolved during this period. Turning to the way in which complaints are received by the Council, our online form continues to grow in popularity, with a reduction in the number of email complaints and telephone complaints received as a proportion. Letter and in-person visits, which we still receive, continue to be rare. The vast majority of complaints were categorised as service not meeting expected standards. Again, this figure is impacted by the number of historic waste complaints that were resolved. In terms of the number of complaints the Council agreed with, the proportions continue to be representative of what we would expect to see at stage 1, with a fairly even split between agreed and not agreed. At stage 2, far fewer complaints were agreed with, which again we would expect to see. In terms of complaints by service, obviously waste and street scene continues to be the service most frequently complained about. This is obviously as a result of the historic backlog, but also because it is important to remember that this service interacts with far more customers than many other services do. It touches the lives of everyone in the borough, and so we would expect to see more complaints coming through about it. In terms of compensation payments, 4 were offered in the previous period, and there were 3 complaints lodged with the Ombudsman. None of the Ombudsman's complaints were investigated, however, as there were insufficient reasons to do so. Finally, in terms of learning from complaints from this period, there were no significant issues to note or themes through the complaints. Thank you. I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Andy Hickey or Jane Clark? No? Okay. The debate is open. I'm going to say something. There are 49,000 properties in the borough that all need their waste collecting, which is why I just wanted to add to Jane's point that that's a lot of people that we need to work with every day to get through 49,000 properties every week, week in, week out, including the bank holidays, which is an amazing task. So I am hoping to go out with one of the bin crews, and I'm told that will be a proper fitness session to there. Okay. No, does anybody else want to say anything on complaints? No? Okay, so I am going to move the recommendation, which is that Cabinet notes a summary of complaints over period 2, which runs from October 2021 to March 2022. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. And we move on to item 18, which is urgent business. And what urgent business means is that it would be an urgent item that we need to look at as a matter of urgency, which would then have to jump through over the Cabinet Advisory Boards for whatever reason that might be. And I'm pleased to say we have no items of urgent business tonight. And finally, item 19 is the date of the next meeting. Now, as I said earlier, our commitment to our residents as the Borough Partnership is to get out of the Town Hall and go and meet as many residents as possible. So our next Cabinet meeting will be on Wednesday the 20th of July. And if the lovely people from Cranbrook want to join us in Sandhurst for a second round, you're more than welcome. And that's going to be at the Old School Hall in Sandhurst. And the postcode there is TN18 5JS. And just for the recording, my NATO alphabet tells me that this is Tango November 18 5 Juliet Sierra. And I just want to say thank you everybody who's listening online to this Cabinet meeting, and thanks to the dozens of people who made the trip tonight to join us in person here in the Vestry Hall in Cranbrook. And finally, can I just say a very big thank you to all the members of Tunbridge Wells Borough Council who've been beavering away on this Cabinet on tour. We just had to turn up tonight, but there's been a huge amount of work to get us here tonight. And I'd just like to say, on behalf of the Cabinet, thank you very much for your help and support in making this happen. Thank you. And I declare the formal part of tonight closed. Thank you very much. In how many minutes was that?